Hey everybody, welcome back to the Contrarians. We have a special panel discussion tonight, and our topic today is David Bowie. What's your favorite album, or what's his best album, and why? So basically, I'm going to moderate tonight, and I'm going to throw to each of these gentlemen who are Patreon subscribers, and they're all very knowledgeable about music. They blow me away every time they open their mouths, and I always have a lot of fun doing this. So yeah, and we do have one regret: Bicycle Legs can't make it. Please, I know he has a channel, which I think is just called Bicycle Legs on YouTube. So please go and like and subscribe his channel. Also like and subscribe to Contrarians. And if you want to join any of these chats, just join us on Patreon. So I'm very excited to see what everybody's favorite or what they think is the best David Bowie album. Why don't I throw it over, and if you have anything you want to plug, like, go for it. Why don't I throw it over to Andee to start us off? Welcome, Andee.
Hey there. Can you hear me?
Can hear you just fine.
Yes. Okay. Well, nothing to plug. And my favorite album by David Bowie is an album that ushers in a decade in a really kind of particular way. And I sort of pitched this to Martin for his podcast, albums that sort of cross the threshold into a new decade and sort of predict what's about to come, but also kind of wistfully say goodbye to what is past. And so the album is Scary Monsters. I love the post-punk era, and I love how Bowie at this point in his career is sort of an elder statesman, but he's still affecting, the direction of the winds. And basically everybody that's making music at this point is completely indebted to him. I mean, all the people that are really kind of flaring up around this time, from Gary Newman to Adam Ant to Human League to Bauhaus, they all worship at the altar of David Bowie. And so he kind of like crosses over into 1980 as this guy who's had several seismic changes in his own career and his own kind of creative path. And I think he brings all of it to bear on this album in a really interesting way. He just finished up his Berlin episode where he had 3 albums that were very experimental, very influential, not very commercially successful. And I think that he brings all of that fearless, experimental vibe to a really accessible album of tight songs. And it's a very symmetrical album. It's got 5 songs to a side. It begins and ends with the same song in different versions. And so, yeah, basically you have a lot of the stalwarts from his 70s band sticking around for this one. You still have Robert Fripp on guitar. And just to touch on some of my favorite aspects of the album, the first song, It's No Game, has this really kind of unhinged vocal, and kind of it still has the kind of the smell of the Berlin sessions on it, but it's really catchy. It's got these caustic guitar blasts in there, but it's got a chorus, a solid chorus. Up the Hill Backwards is a really melodic song, but it's kind of bookended by these sections in 7/8, again, with really strafing atonal guitar noise going on in there. So I like that he is sort of writing these tight songs, but he's still giving a lot of, he's making you work for it. He's got some really interesting, there's some studio trickery going on. Scream Like a Baby has this weird take where there's a split personality thing going on in his vocals where he's in unison, but one side pitches up and the other pitches down. This is all Tony Visconti engineering. So that's continuing also this, the Berlin kind of mojo. But obviously the linchpin of this album is Ashes to Ashes, which is maybe the greatest new wave song of all time, or the greatest post-punk song, however you want to call it. This is the song where he is really kind of eulogizing himself. The 70s Bowie is now something that he wants to move on from. And he refers to himself sort of, I guess, symbolically as Major Tom, and saying Major Tom's a junkie. So he's like alluding to his drug issues. It's a really dark chorus, you know, for a pop song that gets played a lot on the radio. Elsewhere on the album, he's sort of like observing the goings on in the music business around him. He's sort of, you know, maybe taking the piss out of the New Romantics a little bit with fashion. The song Because You're Young is maybe a sort of older, wiser music veteran giving a bit of advice to the up and comers. So I think it's just this really interesting, you know, nexus in his career where you get all the benefits of his weird avant-garde tendencies, but really tight melodic songs. And he is still influencing things as these movements are kind of like cropping up around him. And then, you know, with our hindsight, we know that this is the last time that we see this Bowie. In 1983, he cashes in, and you get this extremely commercial, hit-laden, blockbuster album, which is great, and I think it's great for what it is. But you don't get this kind of, fearless, experimental quality really until the very end of his life. But by that time, he wasn't really directly influencing, the currents of musical genres and just the fashion of passing music trends. So it's kind of wistful. It looks back on the past, and it's kind of brutally honest about what has happened in the previous decade. And then it also kind of looks forward into this kind of bleak decade. Really, he's looking ahead to the Reagan Thatcher years and the increasing Cold War tensions, and nuclear annihilation is kind of like rising up as this this everyday worry for everybody. So that's it for me. That's all I have to say. Scary Monsters, David Bowie, 1980.
Thanks, Andee. Good pick.
Marco, can we comment on people's stuff as we're
Go
going
for
around?
it. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
One of the things I love about Ashes to Ashes is I think Bowie just cut Robert Fripp loose to do whatever he wanted. There is no way Bowie wrote those licks for Fripp. And if you listen to the solo on Ashes to Ashes is mind-boggling. It's so fast. And yet Robert Fripp never, well, among the metalheads I know, they don't know Robert Fripp, right? Because they're not into prog rock and whatever. But, you know, Fripp was a mind-blowing guitarist. And on that album, he's so far out from doing anything like he was doing with King Crimson. It's astounding.
I want to say one more thing about Robert Fripp too. He was really getting around at this time. He played on a Blondie record. He played on Daryl Hall's, Daryl Hall and he collaborated on a record, right? And he had a solo album around that time as well. So yeah, he was really sneaking some really avant-garde stuff onto the mainstream radio airwaves. It's pretty amazing. I mean, Fashion is another one that's just loaded with this like crazy outside guitar playing.
Yeah. Anyone else? I don't want to take over. Sorry.
Anybody else in the comments? Oh, you're on mute, Joe.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that. I saw a video. This is a full disclosure, spoiler alert. My favorite albums, but the tour for my favorite album, I don't know if it was Robert Fripp or Adrian Belew, because he always had fantastic guitar players. And he was doing stuff Eddie Van Halen would do like 2-3 years later. So it was very innovative stuff. I'm glad you brought that up.
I don't think he ever toured with Fripp, so it was probably Adrian
It was
Belew.
probably Belew then, yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, so why don't you go next, Joe? Tell us what your pick is.
Well, I love, as you know me, I love hard guitar driven rock. And I really started, when I discovered Kiss Alive and all the other bands that we talked about in the past. 1976 was pretty much opened the floodgates for me. And that brought me to David Bowie's Station to Station. And actually, so Bowie played a key role in my life. I met my wife at a David Bowie concert. And she was there to hear Let's Dance. I was there to hear Panic in Detroit. So obviously our musical styles don't coincide very well, but that just shows you the range of changes, no pun intended, that Bowie went through. And I don't know if there's another artist out there that has gone through so many musical and directional changes. And as Andee referenced, I mean, he's influenced everyone from Nikki Sixx to Madonna to everyone in between, and just phenomenal. But I love this album because it's heavy and it's hard guitar driven rock and funk. It starts with Station to Station, and I just love the weirdness of it. Earl Slick and Carlos Alomar. It's a dual guitar attack. I know Bowie, and maybe this is probably reflected in Ashes to Ashes. He does not like this period because he was pretty much living on cocaine, peppers, and milk, according to him. And it's also verified in Glenn Hughes's book because they would hang out together. But I just love this album. It's Station to Station goes through so many weird twists and turns. Golden Years, apparently he wrote it for Elvis Presley and it was rejected, but it's a great classic hit. Word on a Wing is great. You know, it turns it down a notch, and then he goes back in the TV C15. I remember when he performed it on Saturday Night Live. It's great. It's out there on YouTube. And then Stay or Station to Station are my favorite songs on the album. It's heavy guitar, but it has that funk background, and it's just really great. I love this album. I listen to it all the time still. It's in one of my top albums. And my relationship with Bowie ebbs and flows. You know, I discovered, I liked Fame. I had the single, and then I discovered Station to Station. And then Changes One Bowie came out. So I got back into his back catalog. Of course, I love Suffragette City and Panic in Detroit and all the hard rock songs that he had. Starman, I appreciate that. I do love the Berlin era, although not as much as this. Scary Monsters I like, but then in the 80s when he went to Let's Dance and Blue Jean, kind of lost it for me. But actually what pulled me back in as a Bowie fan was the Tin Machine project in the late 80s, early 90s. But interesting enough too, today I received an email from U2 about the 30th anniversary of Achtung Baby, and it was always my contention that U2 did better Bowie in the 90s than Bowie did. I just think they copied Bowie's sound. If you listen to those albums, Achtung Baby, the one after that, and then Pop, I feel that they recorded in Berlin, they used Brian Eno, and I feel that they went in that direction. They took that weirdness and took those chances, but they were copying Bowie. Yes, and then Iman was in the news today saying that David Bowie was her only love and she'll never be married, and she was lamenting his passing away. But Station to Station is just a perfect album for me. It's hard rock, hard funk. It was my first introduction to Bowie. I mean, there was Fame, but my first album that I bought by him, and I listened to it consistently, and I love it. Absolutely love this album. So I love the Thin White Duke era, despite Bowie kind of, he had to get out of LA. He called it hell on earth. But I love that stuff. It's rock and roll. So that's my pick.
Cool.
Nice. Thanks, Joe. I have to throw it over to Brett because you made a reaction when he mentioned U2. I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Oh no, I had never heard that before. And I'm not too big of a U2 fan, but now I feel like I'll have to go back and take a listen to those.
But I was not I liked War, and then when they got really big in the 80s, I couldn't listen to them. My sister was a huge U2 fan, and I was like, enough. But then when they went and did Achtung Baby and I heard it, I'm like, I can tell what they're doing here. And I got into the 90s U2, and I really compared it to David Bowie's Berlin era, maybe the Station to Station stuff. And when they went on tour, they had that big tour, I think it was around 2009, 2010. They incorporated a lot of Bowie. They walked out to Space Oddity and actually
Oh wow. Okay.
one of their songs. But yeah,
Cool.
Josh, you
Hey,
got your hand up.
Yeah, really random, but my parents actually named myself after the album Joshua Tree. Um, but I
Wow.
never really listened to U2, so that's a funny thing. I only know the hits, so maybe I should.
Yeah. Same here.
That's random, but thought I'd throw that out there.
maybe before we move on, if Andy's not going to mention it, Blacksugar Transmission does a kick-ass cover of TVC 15. I was listening to that before the.
all right, I'm in. Is it on Spotify? I have to. I know
Well,
I
it's
bought
on
all your
YouTube.
stuff.
I don't use
Okay.
Spotify, but you can look at it on YouTube. It's Andy, it's kicking. And
Right.
it's
Thank you.
very, your guitar at the end of it is very Reeves Gabrels, in my opinion.
That's high
So-
praise.
Reeves he's a fearless guitarist. He just does all sorts of crazy stuff. Quite the character too.
Another
Thank
another
you.
fun fact: the first song that Dave Mustaine from Megadeth ever learned to play was "Panic in Detroit." So there's another.
Oh wow.
He is-
Okay.
I
I
don't know
would
if an
not have
artist
guessed
that's influenced such a wide array of musicians and artists out there.
Yeah, for sure. That was one of my first as well.
Awesome.
Cool. Why don't you go next, Josh? We haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah, that's true. So Bowie was pretty much the first solo artist I really dived into the catalog of, and I mean, very prolific artist, literally right to his death, and yeah, very varied catalog. I think for me, like most people, it's a certain period that I love more than the later ones, perhaps. But yeah, for me, there are 5 specific albums that sort of are all contenders for my favorite. But at the end of the day, when it comes to those decisions, I have to go with the one that feels the most right. And it was already mentioned, so I hope I don't repeat too much, and that's Station to Station. For many people, this is sort of a transition album of Bowie, because he still has a lot of the things he did on previous albums, like Young Americans, which of course was the album that was released a year before that. And but it also, in my opinion, foreshadows a lot of the things that were to come, for instance, in the specifically in the Berlin period. And I love this about this album. It has sort of the sweet spot when it comes to Bowie, and that makes it sort of his crowning achievement in my mind. And when it comes to the songs, as already mentioned, the title track and Stay and TVC 15, I would say, are all within my top 10 favorite Bowie songs. Station to Station is perhaps his greatest song ever. For me, it's kind of his funeral for a friend, Love Lies Bleeding. Like, that is for Elton John, and that's sort of for Bowie what that song was for Elton John. This long epic song with this long great build up and really chill bringing to me, and emotional. And yeah, I love the whole atmosphere in this album. And yeah, I think, I don't know, there's just something special about, it only has 6 tracks, but each one of them brings something a little bit different to the table. And the flow of the album, I just think, yeah, and Golden Years was already mentioned, really awesome track. And for me, the 2 songs that for me were sort of growers, that means I always liked them, but I really grew to appreciate them and love them more the more I listened to them, and that is Word on the Wing and Wild as the Wind. So now I just can't think of this album without those two too. And yeah, I just really think there's something really particularly special about this album. Of course, it's this point in time where Bowie is really sort of, I mean, he already gained a certain level of freedom in what he's able to do as an artist because of his success. And of course, that also leads to more freedom equals more cocaine in his mind, I guess. And so, but it certainly sort of influenced a lot of what was happening here on Station to Station. And I just really love this album. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great what you brought up. I can't agree with you more. Back to Stay, I listened to it, and then I listened to the first Van Halen album, and I think it was just as innovative, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of similarities in that, those guitar sounds and everything. I know it
Yeah.
sounds weird to people, but it's awesome.
Yeah, I still remember the first time I heard Stay, and I was just like, this is like one of the coolest riffs I've ever heard. Like, and then most people wouldn't think of a Bowie album as delivering like such great riffs, but yeah, as you said, funky, but also just pure rock and roll, and yeah, that's really great about it.
Awesome. Anybody else? Do you want to comment?
I want to say something about that period when he was just living on cocaine and whole milk and red peppers.
The white
There's a
diet.
there's a quality in his voice on Station to Station and Young Americans that you never hear before or after. It's like this cocaine rasp that I love the sound of. Like, I mean, obviously it's not the healthiest sounding, and you see, clips of him from in those days on the Dick Cavett show, and he's just like a skeleton. He looks so bad, and he's sweating and he's sniffling, and it was just a really unhealthy period for him. But I really love what it did to his voice for a couple of years.
Yeah, a couple guys have a period like that. Iggy Pop, Alice Cooper in that blackout period when he's on like the Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder. He looks like almost like a skeleton,
Oh yeah, his teeth were falling out.
Yeah, but that's a really cool Alice Cooper period. Anybody who's seen the show?
You read the
knows some of
Glenn
the
Hughes
blackout.
came out with a book. Glenn Hughes came out with a book. There's like a whole chapter because they hung out in this period, and it's just insanity.
Yeah.
All right, why don't we go with Reed next?
Okay, well, I will do my dead level best to keep this relatively short. First off, I utterly failed at this assignment. I can't get my favorite Bowie down to a single album, so we'll go through that. My first exposure to Bowie was actually in the 80s with the MTV period, and it was either China Girl or Let's Dance. I'm not sure which video came out first. So to me, Bowie was just one of a sea of new musicians that I was exposed to. I tell my story a lot. I was in Montana. We didn't have FM rock radio, so I was not exposed to wider pop culture. MTV was how I got my music. And I remember liking Let's Dance, but it didn't make a huge impression on me. And honestly, after that, I didn't really even look for David Bowie until 2012, when I was going through a lot of musical explorations. And my wife has a bunch of David Bowie CDs, and I started listening to Ziggy Stardust. And then I started collecting other Bowie CDs and discovered that I really like a lot of his stuff. And now I own all of it. And he truly is, I think, the only artist that I'm into that his output is so different that when I go to the shelf, what I pull off is just depending on the mood, right? There's hard rock Bowie, and there's a new wave Bowie, and there's industrial Bowie. I'm going to start off with an honorable mention. So this is not my favorite album, but I really wanted to mention Hunky Dory. I think it's an incredibly underrated album. I think that this album contains his best compositions. He never approached the musical level that he got on this album for the rest of his career. And the fact that it came between The Man Who Sold the World and Ziggy Stardust is really strange positioning. So he had a hard rock album, and then he had a glam rock album. And between the two of them, he did this orchestrational masterpiece. It's very heavy on Mike Garçon's piano. Garçon collaborated with Bowie for years and years. And it's the first time that I really remember a theme, which I was thinking about when Andee's talking about Ashes to Ashes, which was that Bowie's voice is so beautiful. You can listen to him singing about the most horrible things and you just don't notice it, right? Unless you're somebody who makes a point of going and tracking down the lyrics and looking at exactly what he's saying, sometimes it can really fly past you. And go look up the lyrics to Quicksand on this album. Oh, they're devastating. Wisdom comes with death's release. I mean, it is a dark song, but it's so gorgeous. It just, if you're not paying attention, it just goes right over you and you don't even notice it. All right. But as for favorite, I'm going to play extremely loose and say that my favorite Bowie is what I term his apocalyptic trilogy. This is just a trilogy in Reed's head. And that is comprised of Diamond Dogs, One Outside, and of course, I've talked about it before, Black Star. So I think that Bowie, when he was going through really, really hard times, when Bowie felt like the literal end was coming, is when he put out his best and weirdest art. Aladdin Sane was the last album he had done with Mick Ronson. And I think he approached a time where he was like, hey, I've got to step off and be my own artist. So he gets rid of Mick Ronson. He'd already gotten rid of the other Spiders. And he does Diamond Dogs by himself. He actually doesn't record all of the guitars. There are studio musicians who play on this. He just wasn't up to the full range of it. But the story is he wanted to do a concept album based on 1984, and Orwell's estate wouldn't let him. Or maybe even Orwell was still alive. I don't know when that man lived. But regardless, he couldn't do an album about 1984, although there are 2 songs about 1984 on the Diamond Dogs. So he came up with his own post-apocalyptic album, and it is weird, and it is brutal, and it is just absolutely fantastic. And listen to Sweet Thing Candidate and Sweet Thing Reprise. And that's another one of those songs that if you're not paying attention, you're like, oh man, these songs are cool. Those songs are brutal. They are some of the most brutal songs Bowie ever recorded. And you can really just see them as the theme for this guy living in this post-apocalyptic world where things are so bad, people have forgotten how to have sex. That's a real thing, by the way. Bowie was a very strange man. And Marco, there is a lot of Elvis in Bowie, by the way. He hides it well, but he does a lot of Elvis in his various albums. So Diamond Dogs, wonderful album. It's not nearly as slick as Aladdin Sane. And it's way off from Young Americans, which was the next one in his Plastic Soul period. So it's kind of gritty and dark, and it is absolutely the most brutal, weirdest concept album ever to be produced, unless he had come out with this one. And One Outside, which people always call Outside, Bowie had intended to do follow-up albums to this and just never got around to it. He recorded with Brian Eno. Apparently, he recorded an entire year of just random crap. I guess the bootlegs are out there on the internet. I've never had enough interest to go out and find them. I love Weird Bowie. Weird Bowie is my favorite Bowie, but I want some structure. I need some structure to my music. And they just improvised this storyline for a year and then cut it down and came up with this album, which is about the end of the millennium. And it's about this teenage girl who's murdered, and it may have been art and it may not have been art. And they send this private detective out whose job it is to determine whether the murder of this girl was art or not. And again, if that's not one of the darkest things you've ever heard, you live a weird life. This album is so far out there. And I have to say, when I got it on Amazon, right? And Amazon has this thing called auto rip. So you buy a physical CD and then they send you the MP3. It was only this year that I discovered what a disservice that had done me, because I had never listened to that CD. I had only listened to the MP3. And allow me to say again, MP3s suck. If you stream your songs, you are not listening to the music. You get about 40% of the actual sonic content. And when I put in that CD for the first time with a good set of headphones and just sat and listened to it, I was like, oh my God, there's so much actual music in this that I never heard before. And songs that I had thought were kind of long and boring turned out to have so much going on. That album is musically incredible on top of this really weird concept. Plus, I love songs like Heart's Filthy Lesson, which is this kind of proto-industrial thing. Anyway, just some great, great music on that one. And then, of course, that was apocalyptic because he apparently had a lot of angst about the end of the millennium. Really wish he had gotten back to part 2 on that. And of course, Black Star, his apocalypse being his actual apocalypse, he was coming to an end, and somehow produced that avant-garde jazz masterpiece. But if you, like me, if you're enough of a nerd to go back and sit and listen to those 3 albums, Diamond Dogs, Outside, and Black Star, tell me you don't hear a through line that goes between those albums, because they do have some very similar things that come out of Bowie when he's really feeling under this existential pressure. And they're all super dark and weird, and I love them.
Wow.
Nice. You know, if I canceled my Spotify subscription, I could probably buy a CD a month.
Yeah.
Probably afford 1 CD a month. Yeah. Cool.
I
Anybody have
could
any
rail
comments?
against streaming for hours. I will not.
Anybody have any comments?
No, I think it's great. In fact, when I proposed this, full disclosure, I proposed this episode to you, you wanted to do a controversial Bowie album. And I'm like, you can't do that because, as been stated numerous times already, he's gone through so many different periods and musical changes, no pun intended. But Reed, yeah, it's great that you brought that up. And I wanted to do it with Reed because I knew if your insight of Bowie would be perfect for this. So yeah. And has anyone seen the meme where diamonds are a girl's best friend and dogs are a man's best friend? Therefore, the diamond dog David Bowie is everybody's best friend.
I had not.
All right.
I always remember the
Awesome.
lyric that the diamond dogs are poachers and they hide behind trees. I mean,
Yeah.
some
Nikki's-
music journalist once said that David Bowie is the weirdest guy to ever achieve pop stardom, and I think that's correct. He was so far out there. God bless him.
He's weird, but he was also very normal at times. It just, once again, just a very complex person. It was great. Yeah, Nikki Sixx in Heroin Diaries, I believe, talks about Diamond Dogs a lot. It's one of his favorite albums.
Very cool. And last but not least, Brett, give us your pick.
So before that, Joe, you had said that you don't think there's a controversial David Bowie record, but I feel like there is one that kind of gets soured on that you could talk about, and that would be Never Let Me Down. I know David Bowie, when the album first came out, it was so poorly produced that, you know, within the couple of years, he had totally, he was very sour on it. But the 2018 reproduction of it is actually really good. But I know that's an album that a lot of people don't really like. I was thinking about that. That would have been a good Contrarians episode.
The 2018 version of that is phenomenal.
Oh yeah, it's light years ahead of the original one. But for my inclusion, my deep dive into David Bowie didn't really begin until later in my life. I just turned 33 recently, and it wasn't until I was maybe 25 or 26 when I really started to listen to him, and even more so after his passing in 2016. Given my age, it shouldn't really come as much of a surprise that my introduction to him was as Jareth the Goblin King and Jim Henson's The Labyrinth. I'm not going to say that's my favorite record, even though I do absolutely love this movie, and I really like the 5 tracks that he wrote and recorded for the film. But my favorite album is his 5th studio release, 1972's The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Besides my opinion that I think it's definitely one of his most quintessential records, I absolutely love that this is a concept record. I'm a sucker for concept records, and to use a term that I know Joe and Marco would understand, I'm a total mark for concept records, especially this one. And, you know, just to give a quick synopsis of the concept, Ziggy Stardust is this Martian from a distant galaxy, as Bowie had claimed. He's like this androgynous bisexual Martian, and he gets brought down to Earth, and he's seen as a savior because he's going to save them from this apocalyptic, disastrous event that's supposed to happen within 5 years. And he becomes this rock star type figure, and he gets all this adulation, and everyone falls in love with him. And then it all goes to his head, and he, experiences a fall from grace. And ultimately, Rock and Roll Suicide. The album is bookended, 5 years, and then Rock and Roll Suicide. I believe that's the title of the last album, but I mean the last track. I'm sorry. But this is one of my favorite records. I would even go as far as saying as 5 years is probably one of my favorite David Bowie tracks. So much so that a friend of mine, me and him would perform it any chance we would get if we were ever at an open mic, and he had a guitar and I had some form of a percussive instrument. He would play guitar and sing, and I would do backup vocals and play tambourine, drums, anything we could find. I do know that Bowie had said in interviews in like the early 2000s that he had plans to possibly do a musical, like a Broadway version of the story, which I think would have been very cool. It's unfortunate that we would have never gotten that. But yeah, this is definitely my favorite David Bowie record. There's, I love Station. Pretty much every album that we've mentioned in this discussion, I would definitely consider my favorites. But that one is at the top for me. And just one more thing, we brought, everyone's brought up the story about how like for 3 years or whatever it was, he lived on nothing but peppers, cocaine, milk, and cigarettes. There's a podcast that I listen to, these guys that I know, it's called Last Podcast on the Left. They did an episode not too long after he'd passed away called David Bowie and the Occult, and they talk about his obsession with the occult in the 1970s and just some of the crazy stories that he was involved in, kind of like how he was, at one point he was convinced that Jimmy Page had put a hex on him because he knew that Jimmy Page was living in Aleister Crowley's house. So in order to prevent whatever curse that he believed Jimmy Page had put on him, he had actually would store jars of his own urine in his refrigerator.
As you do.
Yeah, exactly. Totally sane stuff. But it was just, it's a very interesting listen. And they talk about how like his obsession with, the occult and figures like Aleister Crowley played into his music in the early days leading up to the 80s when, he had that musical genre transition.
I got a question for all you, since you're all David Bowie fans. I was under the impression, I think I read this or somebody told me this a long time ago, that Ziggy Stardust was technically signed as a separate act to the label. So it's almost, is that technically a different band? Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
I never heard that. I know he went full method. Like it was the first alter ego of his that he fully went in on. And it took him over for a couple of years when he was encapsulated in that character.
Yeah.
I thought I read somewhere, I'm not a huge like Bowie aficionado or anything like this. That's one of the few records I'm actually kind of familiar with. But I thought I read somewhere that he actually signed Ziggy Stardust, the persona, is technically like a separate act to David Bowie.
Yeah,
Possible. And
maybe I misread that. I don't know.
I wanted to ask the panel, is there an artist that you can think of that has gone through so many has covered so many musical genres or has influenced so many musicians? I mean, possibly the Beatles and the influential department, but for just musical diversity, I don't know if there's another artist out there.
Well, funny, I would not have thought of any that came close if it wasn't for something else the Contrarians did, and that is Sparks. Sparks, and watch that documentary, doggone it. That was the most entertaining documentary I've seen in years.
I just watched it the other night. It was so good. They
apparently influenced, they created the Pet Shop Boys. They were very influential, but they, to me, just based on, since then I've watched some videos on MTV and the things I saw in the documentary and stuff, they did not have Bowie's breadth of music. They were still within a broad but defined range, whereas Bowie was all over the place.
Yeah, but Bowie goes from, like I said before, Bowie goes to like Lady Gaga and Madonna to heavy metal,
Yeah.
everything in between.
Punks were influenced, but punks were
Yeah.
big into songs like Suffragette City. That was a big influence on the punk movement.
Duran and Def Leppard, both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I
even more, I would say even more so his music. There are a lot of movies that he's been in that I've enjoyed, and you don't have a lot of musicians that you could say that in the same category, that some of the roles that he's played is just as entertaining and just as good as his music. And if there's one movie I can recommend, he did like this weird horror movie in the 1980s called The Hunger, where he played a vampire, that I just watched the other day. It's huh?
I said that one's not bad. He made some crap as an actor.
Oh yeah,
But
he
that one's
didn't.
not bad.
But he had his fair share. Like, I even love his character with his terrible Southern accent on in the Twin Peaks stuff that he did. I don't know, actually. I don't even know what type of accent he was going for there, but.
And he did eventually get his Broadway show, right? The Man Who Fell to Earth.
Yeah.
Off Broadway.
Cool. I got a few. Let me throw out just a few statistics, and then we'll get some comments and wrap up here. The Guardian has a top 50 David Bowie songs. So the top 5 is number 1 is Sound and Vision. Number 2 is Ashes to Ashes. 3 is Station to Station. 4 is Life on Mars, and number 5 is Heroes.
Wow. Wait, what list was this?
This was the Guardian's top 50 David Bowie songs.
Wow, that's an interesting top 5.
Ultimate Classic Rocks. Sorry, I'll go through this real quick and then we'll get everyone's comments. Ultimate Classic Rock did their David Bowie album list, and they had Low at number 1, Hunky Dory at number 2, Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust at number 3, number 4, Station to Station, number 5, Heroes. Best ever albums, which is an aggregate thing. They take information from all over the internet. They have Ziggy Stardust at number 1, Hunky Dory number 2, Low number 3, Station to Station number 4, and Black Start number 5. And interestingly enough, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust ranks number 1 for the category of 1972. So they rank that as the best album of 1972. And for anybody who cares about Rolling Stone has an album guide to David Bowie, and number 1 is The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust. And I'm going the wrong way here. Number 2 is Hunky Dory, 3 is Station to Station, 4 is Low, and 5 is Diamond Dogs.
One other thing I wanted to ask the panel, what did you think of his pop era in the 80s when he got huge? Let's Dance, Blue Jean, China Girl. What did you think of that at the time and now? Now?
Well, obviously I can't say at the time. I wasn't even a thought then. But I love his 80s stuff. I have a thing for 80s pop, 80s new wave, things like that. It just really gets to me. So I have an enjoyment. I really like, the 80s stuff that he has done, just as much as, anything that came before that, really.
Yeah, I thought he jumped the shark and I was done. But then now in hindsight, it was really good. But at the time, I was Mr. Metalhead. There's no way I could listen to that.
I loved Let's Dance. I thought Tonight was boring, and Never Let Me Down is so freaking overproduced. It's impossible for me to listen to the original version of it.
And of course, there's Dancing in the Streets with Mick Jagger.
Yeah, there is.
Has any one of you watched that video where the music is totally out and you just hear them make those human noises and they just stand around? Watch it on YouTube.
When Joe mentioned that, that's the first thing I thought of, and that is by far the funniest video I have ever seen. It's these two guys that are miming what David and Mick are saying. You hear no music. It is so funny. I would definitely recommend checking it out.
Can I ask the panel quickly, what's everyone's favorite David Bowie song, if you could pick one?
Well, ironically, I think Heroes is my single favorite Bowie composition. I think it's a fabulous song. I think it's got an amazing story behind it. Also, Motorhead does a great cover of it, but that's a completely different thing.
Mine goes day to day. I mean, station to station. Cracked Actors, Panic in Detroit. Cracked Actors is a great song too.
Yes.
Stay. I mean, yeah. Probably Station to Station, but those other ones are very close.
I would say Ashes to Ashes is my favorite, but I think the song that I'm most in awe of compositionally is Life on Mars. It's just an unbelievable, unlikely string of chord progressions. I actually covered that recently at a twin 3-year-old girl's birthday party with my friend Paul singing. And yeah, it's got something like 30 unique chords in it. It's pretty towering in its compositional prowess. But yeah, I think emotionally for me, it's Ashes to Ashes.
Brett,
Yeah,
you want to take a shot at it?
Huh?
Said, do you want to take a shot at it?
Oh, 5 years. 5 years is most definitely my favorite, one of my favorite David Bowie tracks. But I was thinking about it, and you had mentioned Heroes, and embarrassingly enough, the very first time I heard that song was when the Wallflowers covered it in like 1998 for the Godzilla soundtrack. So that was like my pseudo introduction to David Bowie. That's something I'm entirely proud of, but it was like a random memory that I kind of had like stored in the back of my head. I was like, wait a minute, that's the first time I heard that song.
Wow. I do have to question all the lists that put Low so far up. That is a really challenging album. Half of it is instrumental. It's very heavily Brian Eno, which is fine if you like Brian Eno instrumentals, but I think that most fans, you go into a Bowie album for the vocals, right? I mean, he's a vocalist. He was actually a pretty good guitarist, but I think of him pretty exclusively as a vocalist. So then to get half an album that's got no vocals on it, and the music is very, very different.
Ironically enough, a lot of deep cut, David Bowie fans, they like to pick Low, as sometimes I see it often picked as their favorites. So that's really interesting sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're doing that ironically. I mean, people are entitled to like whatever they like. I just think that's a really weird album to have as your top David Bowie album, especially for a music magazine.
It's not in my top 5 or anything, but I do really like it.
Yeah.
How cool too is it that David Bowie produced 2 of Iggy Pop's like generally considered best albums, right? The Idiot and Lust for Life.
Yeah.
So I actually consider those 2 albums to be the best albums of Bowie's Berlin period.
Wow.
I'll take them over Low, Lodger, or Heroes.
Nice. And he also produced, I think he produced a couple of other ones too, Iggy Pop ones, but later, I think in the late 80s, early 90s. And I think he toured with Iggy Pop too, and like played the keyboards or something. Which, yeah,
He did. Yeah.
So what did everyone think of his Tin Machine project with Soupy Sales Sons? I thought it was really cool at the time. Yeah.
I'm an enormous Reeves Gabrels fan, so I love all of his stuff with Reeves Gabrels playing, and I love Tin Machine. I actually haven't heard Oy Vey Baby.
I haven't listened to Tin Machine too much, I have to be honest.
Same.
I think he would have done better to have it a little less low key, a little bit more aggressive. That's all.
I think that's pretty good for now. It was a pretty in-depth David Bowie conversation. So I don't know, anybody who wants to join us on Patreon, you can join these discussions. We really look forward to these. We're going to do these more frequently, smaller groups, but more chats. So I look forward to some of the topics that are be coming up in the future. And thanks everybody for joining us. And I guess we'll see you next time. Thanks everyone.
All right. Thanks everyone.